As the sun yawns and dips below the horizon and the medieval village falls into the embrace of twilight, let's tiptoe into the snug world of the medieval peasants. Wrapped in the rustic, earthy aroma of fresh hay and hearty laughter, we find the humble abodes of yore huddled together like a flock of contented sheep. Come, settle down as the woolen cloak of night envelops us, and let's discover how these resilient souls survived those chilly, frost-nipped nights without the luxurious joys of central heating or electric blankets. Imagine yourself in a time when the crackling fire in a modest hearth was both central heating and television. Our journey begins with a well-liked pastime, gathering around the communal fire. Yes, medieval peasants believed in teamwork, especially when it involved warmth. Anyone who's ever huddled up to a campfire can attest that the best stories, and sometimes the tallest tales, are spun under its flickering glow. Between the practical acts of heating, a communal pot of nourishing porridge, or mending the day's woven linens, the peasants swapped stories that rivaled even the most riveting soap operas. A knight's clueless escapades, or a neighbor's overhyped run-in with a particularly fierce-looking goat, the oral traditions that kept their spirits cozy were as warming as the stew simmering over the flames. But let us not forget their trusty bastion against the cold, layering. Yes, the medieval peasants had unlocked the secrets of advanced fashion before capital F fashion was even a concept. With layers of wool, linen, and occasionally fur, they transformed themselves into rollicking bundles of resilience. You could say they were medieval Michelin men, artful concoctions of the fabric of their own lives. While we may shy away from plaid-on-plaid combinations today, these frosty fashion pioneers don their layers with a panache that could have won any medieval runway show. Ah, bedding, the lair of nocturnal dreams and reprieve from daily toil. Now you may imagine the peasants nestled in lavish silks, but the reality was much simpler and perhaps more charming. Humble earthen floors were layered with straw mattresses, the natural precursor to memory foam. The straw mattress had a knack for memorizing your exact sleeping position. To dismiss this ingenuity would be a straw-tastrophe. Topped with heavy wool blankets and perhaps a quilt made of whatever fabric leftovers available, their sleepover tactics were as rich in warmth as they were in community spirit. A delightful technique to escape the icebound clutches of night was the bundling up practice, popular in both familial and romantic bedtime rituals. This cozy method involved sharing one's sleeping space with the closest of kin or kin intended. While this might sound like a precursor to communal beds, it was simply an efficient way to stave off winter's bite, even if it meant waking up to your cousin's elbow in your ribs. Of course, nothing caps off a frosty winter evening like a beverage to warm your innards. Enter the medieval cure-all, ale. Just a sip of their homemade brew could transport one to a land without chills, where everything was just a tad more heartwarming. While tales tell us it was not unusual for peasants to nod off mid-banter, the occasional snooze was just another valued part of the evening schedule. As the gentle blanket of midnight silence spreads over the medieval village, we're left to ponder a world where simplicity was the definitive sophistication. Their resourcefulness, their community spirit, and their knack for finding warmth in the heart and hearth must have made the coldest nights feel, if not downright summery, then certainly less lonely. As you drift off beneath your own layers tonight, remember the ingenuity of those who came before us. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. We'll rest here tonight, our imaginations soothed by the crackle of a long-extinguished fire, until our ramble through history picks up once more. Let the Sandman accompany your dreams with promises of more tales from times past as we tiptoe forward with curiosity and cozy charm. As the twilight gradually descended upon the medieval village, painting the skies with hues of lavender and gold, our focus gently lands upon a humble thatched roof abode where Jonas the peasant resided with all the grace of a slightly tipsy chicken. Now you might wonder, How on earth did Jonas and his fellow peasants manage to survive the chilling grip of winter nights? Well, gather around, dear listener, as we journey through the subtle art of cozy survival in medieval times. To start, it's crucial to acknowledge the architecture of Jonas's humble abode. Constructed with thick wattle and daub walls, a delightful mixture of easy-to-obtain mud, straw, and twigs, these homes provided sublime insulation. It's as if Mother Nature herself wrapped these peasants in a fluffy blanket of organic materials, minus the convenience of modern craftsmanship. The walls were a marvel of medieval ingenuity, retaining some warmth while keeping out the brunt of the cold. Their roofs, similarly, were laden with an abundance of straw, giving each home the delightful aroma of unbaked bread, though this was far less appetizing in reality. Inside, life was bustling and practical. On frosty evenings, the central hearth was the sacred heart of the peasant home. Flames flickered hypnotically, casting a warm glow that danced on the worn wooden beams. Here, Jonas and his family gathered, huddled as if telling secrets to the fire, eating meals that were part stew, part imagination. The hearth was key, not only for cooking what passed for a meal, a delightful stew of turnips and, when luck struck, the odd rabbit, but also for letting residents bask in its glorious, albeit slightly unpredictable warmth. But what's a story about warmth without mentioning the classic medieval bed? Picture a mattress of straw laid out atop a wooden frame, all carefully engineered to provide comfort so soft one might describe it as innovative. Jonas and his family nestled together under woolen blankets, sometimes so closely that personal space simply became a cozy suggestion lost in the night. The warmth of cuddling together was often enhanced by adding a trusty hot stone, heated carefully and placed like a small toasty sibling at one's feet. Then, of course, there was the matter of clothing. Peasants were not known for their luxurious wardrobe, but they were clever too. Layers upon layers of clothing were donned, creating a peasant version of a waddling human onion, because nothing says warmth quite like trousers, tunics, and cloaks stacked like climate-resistant lasagna. Peasants were nothing if not resourceful when it came to warmth. Truly, their resourcefulness was the MP, most valuable peasant, of surviving frigid nights. They were experts of practical improvisation. Spare fabric scraps became makeshift scarves, while small animals like dogs and cats did double duty as both pet and hot water bottle. The medieval peasant knew that sometimes the best blanket was one that came with a ready supply of purrs and tail-induced face tickling. Social gatherings were another vital ingredient in the peasant recipe for warmth. Whether a merry, ale-fueled shindig in the village or simply swapping tales around the fire, there was solace in companionship. The warmth of another's laughter or snoring could light up the darkest of nights, much like a human-shaped candle. Even the lethargic village bard, with his relentless collection of mildly lackluster tunes, was greeted warmly during these gatherings, providing entertainment for the cost of a few spilled ales and an audience willing to endure questionable rhymes. As the night deepened and the cold air whispered more insistently against the cottage walls, the people of the village cocooned themselves in these small comforts and practices. Their world was one that moved with the gentle rhythm of necessity and ingenuity, where surviving yet another night's chill was both the warm hug of a woolen cloak and a triumph of peasant perseverance. And so, as our perspective drifts away from Jonas's household, it slides across the star-studded sky, where our next historical curiosity awaits. A world where warmth isn't just a necessity, but a craft cultivated over fire-lit stories and centuries-old habits. But alas, dear dreamer, that's a tale for another time. As the sun slumbered beyond the medieval horizon, the time for nightly rituals inevitably approached. Picture this: a quaint medieval village, brimming with thatched roofs and a reverence for anything that might today unfurl as deliciously irrelevant to our existence. The humble peasants, jostling between survival and sending little Satan back to hell. I'm talking about winter, of course, carried on with their peculiar winter habits. So how did they rescue themselves from the chilly clutches of winter evenings? You might be surprised to find it wasn't all about bearing the extraordinary cold with stoicism, but rather deft wit and a touch of creativity. Our seasoned medieval peasants, who had no off button on their alarm clocks and were blissfully oblivious to daylight savings, trusted their instincts. They relied on the age-old art of layering. Their wardrobe, tragically monotone and incredibly efficient, boasted tunics, hose, cloaks, and caps. Knitted sweaters, regrettably, were yet a twinkle in the loom maker's eye. However, the skilled add-on of multiple tunics and a few layers of wool ensured that the peasant attire resembled more an exquisite onion than the latest Parisian catwalk sensation. At least their sense of fashion proved warmer, if not entirely more elegant. One of their lesser-known secrets to staying snug was the strategic deployment of furry companions as nighttime space heaters. Simply put, take a peasant, add a cacophony of sleepy, domesticated creatures upon their bed, be it a straw-filled mattress or possibly just a creatively rolled-up hay bale. Dogs, cats, and possibly livestock redefine the idea of a cozy bed, and quite literally, the phrase three-dog night was no flight of fancy. It was more a heat-preserving tactic. The hearth, while the noble heart of any cottage, played a particularly special role during this frosty parade. Between its orange flames played the backdrop to 100 fireside tales, ranging from mundane village gossip to exaggerated legends involving gallant knights and even dragons. A touch of fiction was hardly remiss. In winter, as the flames leapt, food bubbled, stews simmering softly, adding humidity to the room while doubling as both transport and sustenance, much like your grandmother's oven, if she was ever so kind. These cauldrons acted as race car drivers, dashing around the NASCAR circuit of survival, making everyone feel just a little bit warmer by proxy. Now comes the touch of community, a dose of chumminess that's as warm as a snug cup of mulled wine. Medieval peasants, aware of social warmth as much as the thermal kind, occasionally attended communal events dubbed ales in the village alehouse. Such festivities promised not only the delightful intoxication of today's espresso martinis, but also offered a momentary respite from the blistering cold outside, with ale frothy enough to keep them hydrated, and perhaps just merry enough to stay immune to frostbite. The alehouse, a social hub, a medieval oven where tales of yore were spun with heightened embellishments and affection. Let us not overlook the quintessential role of beds in this chilling narrative. Contrary to all modern sensibilities, sleeping arrangements could be amusingly communal. If the stratagem of lone survival waned, nothing rallied the spirits quite like gathering family, friends, and in-laws upon a similarly arranged horizontal plane, fostering mutual warmth through sheer proximity. Strangely enough, this will prepare us for something uniquely medieval in the coming chapter, sleeping in an intertwined mix of strategic comfort and architectural ingenuity that you might not usually associate with our medieval companions. But lower your shields and burden your eyelids once more, for next we shall amble towards the corridors of collective chaos in the night, amidst the creaky, timber-scented abbeys and the jangle of tankards in dusky taverns of medieval Europe. The coldest of nights descended upon the humble peasant's cottage like an overzealous auditor, unexpected and decidedly unwelcome. Now imagine, if you will, that you are one such peasant, bravely battling against the bitter chill, armed only with as much wit and warmth as you can muster, and definitely not an electric blanket or central heating. Quite the adventure, eh? Life in those cozy little homes was peppered with more than just a dash of stubbornness and creativity as peasants faced off against the frosty bursts of winter. In truth, they were masters of a very particular art, known as making do with what you've got, something we modern folk politely refer to as DIY. So, let us enter this world where thriftiness meets inventiveness and discover how medieval peasants managed to survive even the most frigid of evenings. Picture a typical medieval household. The entire family, possibly including a goat or two, for companionship and warmth, slept in a single room beneath a thatched roof that was adept at keeping out weather but not so commanding when it came to warmth. Earthy floors remained stubbornly chilled, but clever use of rushes and straw matting tried their best to keep frostbitten toes at bay. Insulation material, otherwise known as layers, upon layers of whatever clothing they possessed, was the medieval equivalent of a warm hug, and incidentally, a savvy approach to fashion. The fireplace was the heart of the home, not simply for roasting the day's meager culinary spoils, but as the central heating of its day. Given the scarcity of wood, trees were more friends for companionship, not fuel. The range was limited, yet precious. Common families huddled around these fiery beacons, dreamily contemplating the luxury of a hoary blizzard outside, where snowflakes gently surrendered themselves to the icy fate on the dark, wet earth. To ensure the heat did not escape into the eager night air, some families turned simple carpentry into an art form, creating wooden obstacles called bedboxes that trapped the family's collective warmth. These boxes became snug abodes, kept cozy with a conglomerate of bodies, blankets, and the occasional onion-shaped pillow. Not the most orthodox of sleeping arrangements, but it worked wonders against the capricious cold. Ingenious methods of nighttime insulation abounded. Straw mattresses served as wonderful heat retainers, and when paired with woolen blankets made from the family sheep's generous yearly offerings, they might just fool one into forgetting the frost that nipped outside. Clothing was all the rage, with even the mightiest undergarments and undergarments earning respect for their ability to shield mortal flesh from the icy clutches of winter. The nighttime repast often consisted of warming porridges or soups, ladled with a great flourish from bubbling cauldrons. No mere culinary exercise, this ritual imbued the home with steam, a friendly phantom that lingered just long enough to caress cold noses with hints of distant warmth. Each dish was seasoned with stories, laughter, and the occasional misadventure brought to light by the flames. Let's not forget the unsung heroes of coziness, the animals. Beyond the footstools and occasional dinner, guests, they provided not just eggs, milk, and interminable bleats, but contributed an additional layer of warmth. In this symbiotic relationship, man and beast snuggled together, bonded by necessity and a refusal to succumb to chillier intentions. And so, as the fire embers waned and stories gave way to sleepy nods, medieval peasants remained steadfast protectors against encroaching cold, expertly crafting nights that whispered of warmth and resilience. As our story gently drifts towards its next tale, we leave behind the rustic homes and their enchanting occupants for a moment. Yet the echoes of crackling fires, the soft rustle of straw, and shared laughter remain a glint in the pale memory of history, a cozy chapter in the broader saga of survival and wit that warmed even the coldest of medieval nights. As the flickering glow of the medieval hearth began to tease shadows into a mesmerizing dance upon the thatched walls, our humble peasants faced nights that were as frosty as an overcooked turnip forgotten at the back of the larder. You see, medieval winters were rather fond of stretching their icy fingers into every nook and cranny of the peasant's hovel, as relentless as a tax collector determined to find that last penny. Imagine the scene, a cozy cacophony of snores echoing through their humble abode, roughly synchronized with the crackling of the fire that valiantly battled against the creeping cold. This was the medieval peasant's lullaby, accompanied by the occasional snuffle from a contented piglet, who by necessity rather than design became a bedfellow during the more unforgiving seasons. You may ask, how did they actually manage to survive such spine-chilling nights without the luxury of an electric blanket, or even a single Netflix series to binge? The answer, my dear sleepy observer, lies in the art of layering, a fashion sense that, dare we say, puts modern fashionistas to shame. The peasant wardrobe was limited, yet versatile. To prepare for a cold night, They would don every layer available, making them resemble a well-fed onion, each tunic and cloak an essential in the battle against the chill. Throughout Europe, one or two brave souls would volunteer, or perhaps they drew the proverbial short straw to keep the hearth's embers alive through the night. In the absence of reliable alarm clocks, these keepers of the flame relied on their internal circadian rhythms, and occasionally the urgent reminder that frostbite was a little too close for comfort. This heroic endeavor ensured that come morning, the fire would spring back to life with just a little coaxing, much like an old friend who knows that all the juiciest gossip. Meanwhile, inside the straw-stuffed mattresses, family members would huddle together under whatever blankets they could scrounge, capitalizing on the warmth of shared body heat. This communal sleeping arrangement wasn't just practical. It was the medieval version of a quaint social network, a chance to share tales, dreams, and the occasional discontent over Uncle Edgar's midnight cheese-induced antics. It was also rather customary to garnish their snug sleeping quarters with various pets, those living hot water bottles that purred, barked, or in the particularly pastoral homesteads, bleated their nighttime serenades. Each creature curled in its own designated nook, contributing its own small part to the ambient warmth, creating a mildly chaotic yet strangely comforting symphony of nature's warmth generators. In the wealthier households, our medieval ancestors would also employ the use of the bed warmer, a metal pan filled with hot coals, designed to take the edge off the icy sheets before one dared to slip under them. Think of it as the ancestors' answer to central heating, albeit one that had the misguided potential to set your straw mattress aflame if handled by an overly eager novice. For those with a penchant for the purely impractical, there were always herbal remedies and potions, unsure mixtures of herbs and spices that purportedly kept one warm if consumed before bedtime. With the right blend, you could be as toasty as a poached pear in mulled wine, or at the very least, so bewildered by the flavors you'd forget about the cold entirely. Now, as the starlit village nestled under its blanket of twinkling frost, the cleverest peasants had yet another trick up their sleeves, or rather, under their caps. A good woolen hat, snugly pulled over one's ears, served the dual purpose of warding off the chill and muting the less melodious nocturnal sounds. Thus, wrapped in warmth and dreams, they drifted into slumber, knowing well the centuries-old secret that the best way to endure the darkness was together. As you nestle deeper into your own cozier reality, let's leave our medieval friends under their tapestry of stars, dreaming dreams woven from simplicity and shared moments. And should you find your mind wandering to what dawn brings, rest assured, the morning sun always finds its way home. At the heart of our exploration, tonight lies the curious case of medieval peasant footwear. Imagine, if you will, the endearing sight of an entire village slipping and sliding their way through a frosty dawn, unshod and unsteady. A clumsy ballet of bumps and bruises on the icy stage of life, their morning commute, as much entertainment as ordeal. Thankfully, our peasants had the foresight that many toddlers and penguins adopted ages later. Shoes. But not just any shoes. These were the lowly boots of the serfs, fashioned with a flair no cobbler of our time could ever recreate. When temperatures plummeted to that peculiar point where a shiver transitions from mere discomfort to an impromptu dance, the solution was simple. Stuff some straw in your shoes. Alas, the poor man's toasty toes had its benefits, at least until said straw transformed into a soggy mess. Because, surprise, medieval roads weren't exactly paved, or dry, or roads for that matter. What the peasants lacked in insulation, they made up for in hubris. To stave off frostbite, they bravely wore multiple layers of ragged wool stockings, an innovator's patchwork quilt wrapped tightly around their weary feet. Picture it. Rustic peasants striding valiantly through snow, their stealthy steps muffled by more wool than a gathering of thoughtfully sheared sheep. A medieval precursor to our modern chunky socks that scream style, warmth, and caution when walking on wooden floors. Now let us wander into a dimly lit medieval cottage to decipher the enigma of home heating. Such cozy abodes boasted sophisticated climate control systems, better known as giant open fireplaces that sent half the heat adoringly up the chimney. A feat of engineering that had absolutely nothing in common with modern technology. Here, warmth was less a product and more of a collective village experience, the entire family huddled together under one roof, pressed, shoulder to shoulder like a can of deeply impoverished sardines. Yet, contrary to popular sentiment, the hearth was not just a place for warming your numb extremities. Oh no, it was the epicenter of medieval innovation and entertainment. For example, a favorite strategy was drying one's breeches while still wearing them. A fine line walk between achieving warmth and redefining the term hot pants. Their methods may sound ridiculous now, but shine a thought on our modern tradition of checking a burning oven to determine pizza doneness. We'll call it even. At night, when the cold grew teeth and the peasant population retreated indoors, these stalwart serfs turned to yet another lesson in warmth called group sleeping. Entire families, much like a bag of kittens, sprawled on crude mattresses filled by straw, warmed collectively by shared body heat. Privacy was sacrificial, utterly redeemed by warmth. Suffice it to say, the quest for comfort often overrode any sniffles of synchronous personal space. Especially creative were those families with chickens, our feathery, clucking comrades, who doubled as biological heaters when properly persuaded to nestle inside. Yes, the practice of the more, the warmer was alive and well in rural huts, although these chickens didn't contribute without a cost. Imagine being serenaded to sleep by rhythmic pecking on the grain-studded dirt floor, or waking up suddenly under the scrutiny of a beady eye. Finally, just as you envisioned the peasantry settling into a quiet slumber, remember that this was also the medieval age of deterrence. For when you live in a world without deadbolts or security cameras, your best defense against nefarious knights or opportunistic bandits was the hollow threat of the village rooster named, perhaps, Sir Pexalot, ready to crow at any slight disturbance, a security system as effective as it was whimsical. And so, as our journey with these enduring, endearing peasants draws this chapter to a leisurely close, imagine them nestled together, their rudimentary warmth strategies in action, preparing to face another frigid day of medieval life with the same resilience and slightly absurd practicality. As we drift toward the next realm of their rustic existence, let us quietly embrace the gentle fantasy of what else lies ahead in our quaint and frosty saga. As the lantern's glow dwindles and the distant hoot of an owl cradles the sleepy village in its wings, we find ourselves wandering into the surprisingly snug world of medieval peasant bedchambers. Picture it, a rustic abode under the cover of night, the howling winds kept at bay by little more than the walls of a thatched roof cottage. Yet, somehow, with a dash of creativity and a pinch of practical ingenuity, these peasants managed to transform their humble abodes into warm bastions against the encroaching chill. At the heart of every peasant home lay the hearth, the medieval version of central heating, albeit more smoke-filled and less reliable. There, under the flicker of crackling firewood, lay the secret weapon in the battle against the cold, the family pig. Yes, that's right. Our porky pals were included, not just as future bacon endeavors, but as purveyors of warmth. Snugly settled near the glowing embers, these swine made excellent hot water bottles. I suspect they didn't mind either, remaining blissfully unaware of their multi-purpose household role. If cuddling livestock wasn't to your liking, you could turn to the good old-fashioned bedfellow. Unrelated to romantic overtures or midnight escapades, these were simply fellow shiverers with whom to share body heat. A medieval mattress, crafted from straw and covered in coarse linen, could accommodate several village souls intent on keeping toasty by proximity, even if it wasn't the most aromatic of solutions. For those with a penchant for style-sensible warmth, we should not forget the wondrous invention of layered clothing. Medieval fashionistas would simply don every tunic, chemise, and woolen sock within reach, resulting in a striking, albeit cumbersome, marshmallow silhouette. Movement was restricted, but as they say, fashion sometimes demands a sacrifice of both dexterity and dignity. No discussion of medieval winter survival would be complete without mentioning the ingenious bedpan, a cunning contraption doubling as both a chamber pot and a foot warmer. Whether lovingly refilled by a family member, hopefully one with a steady hand, or heated by stones, this dual-purpose marvel ensured toes remained toasty through the night. One can only hope that coordination, especially in the twilight hours, did not fail. And there was always charm in folklore and the power of belief. Peasants would hang sprigs of rosemary and mint, thought to ward off evil spirits who might be lurking in the cold night's embrace. It wasn't proven to keep frostbite at bay, but it did freshen the room and at least feel proactive. Finally, the most elusive trick of all, optimism. Surviving a medieval winter demanded more than mere mortal fortitude. It required humor and hope. Whether laughing about the neighborhood's latest frost-induced misadventure or reminiscing about the warmer fields of yesteryears, laughter warmed the heart and perhaps heated the home, far better than any bricks or stones. As the embers in the hearth fade into a gentle glow, the world of the medieval peasant remains a testament to resilience and resourcefulness, thrumming gently with the sounds of deep breaths slowly settling into rhythm, a tender lullaby echoing through the windswept landscape. Dream of starry skies, quiet whisperings of history past, and the secrets held deep within sleeping villages. With such thoughts swirling softly through the mind like a warm breeze, we drift into the next chapter of our gentle journey, a whisper of history waiting to unfold. In the glow of a medieval moon, as the frosty air wrapped its icy fingers around the small timber-framed cottages, the industrious peasants of yore were ready for a battle most chilly. Welcome to the evening melt-off contest against the bone-nipping clutches of winter. As dusk fell, villagers didn't don their armor for combat, but prepared for a nightly ritual of warmth retention that could put an IKEA catalog to shame. You see, insulation back then wasn't a matter of installing double-glazed panes or hefty duvets. No, they had something much more ingenious and fuzzier. Enter the loyal companion called sheep, loved not just for their knack for growing sweaters on demand, but also for acting as portable heaters. Imagine curling up at night with a woolly bundle, your arms wrapped around Barbara and Eunice, as their gentle bleats lulled you into a cozy slumber. Sure, the occasional nuzzling nibble on your ear might jar you momentarily awake, but it was a small price for heated comfort. Sheep therapy, medieval style. Now, if your farmstead inventory included more wind than wool, the community shared its warmth strategies much like a candle heating an underbaked pie. While Lord Throckmorton's castle had the luxury of expansive hearths with logs the size of a small cow, poorer peasants made do with a cozy contraption known as a warming pan. This was essentially a frying pan on a pole, which you filled with piping hot coals and swooshed under the sheets, a bit like slipping into a heated toaster. Never mind the occasional ember turning your dreams into a sizzling s'mores scenario. It was all part of the rustic charm. The fashion trends of the night were decisively layered. Let's talk about the fabled night shifts that were worth their weight in hay. Literally. More layers than a cabbage, covered with extra surcoats and perhaps the odd tablecloth turned transitional tunic. And if peasant prose alone sounds snug, the reality was even more enveloping. Flannel may not have been invented yet, but a series of section patched-up linens is what constituted medieval haute couture bedtime collection, winter edition. As for the floors, straw provided the answer, scattered across the earthen ground like a golden carpet of questionable hygiene but undeniable efficacy. And between the harrowing cold and the potential rise of a mouse-sized landlord charging rent under these sleeping arrangements, dreaming never reached more vertiginous heights. The goal was simple: keep thy appendages from freezing, and if thy feet collided with something wet and squishy in the straw, mayhap it was yet another sheep, or perhaps the cat. Even in dreamtime, nourishment played its part. Watching the glow of flickering hearths while sipping mugwort or hot ale was often how these industrious souls wound down. The most daring of nightcaps came in the form of a pre-sleep stew, an assortment named pottage luck. It earned its moniker by blending garden greens with mystery meat Mondays, delightfully warm but hit or miss in flavor reliability. But as each member of this medieval diorama sank blissfully into their textile ocean of warmth, cheeks aglow and spirits buoyant for tomorrow's toiling, one perhaps could be found winding the community psaltery or narrating fireside tales of knights, saints, or talking livestock, gloriously promoting the virtues of marmalade. In this orchestra of rustic ingenuity, the bitter night's surrender to the sweet embrace of survival was not just inevitable, but painstakingly humorous. Given the luxury of looking back from our central heating and insulated glory, their modes of staying warm may have been third-rate fire hazards, but they retained a first-class charm. They made the ordinary magical and the bleakness bearable, with a few comic bleats and a lot of heart. And so, as our winks and wares are ushered to the close, let's snuggle down deeper, awaiting tales of even quirkier ideas that await with the turn of the night, as the great medieval moon cast its silvery gleam over the sleeping thatched roofs of the peasant village. A peaceful hush enveloped the land. It was a night when even the cows with their curiously soulful eyes seemed to dream about greener pastures. Of course, our peasants had other matters on their minds, like not turning into peasant sickles before the rooster crowed. We find ourselves in the soft embrace of rural Europe, circa the 14th century, back in an era where home heating technology consisted of enthusiasm about woolen sweaters and the occasional grumbling fire in the hearth. During these frigid nights, it wasn't uncommon for poor peasants to fancy themselves spontaneous historians, chiefly by recalling ancestral memories or, more accurately, handing down the secret art of huddling. You see, our frost-defying ancestors had a simple solution to cold weather survival. Pile up. That's right. Who needs personal space when you have a family heap on the straw mattress? In a practice charmingly known as topping and tailing, children would lie head to foot like a defective jigsaw puzzle, their sole aim to wake up without frostbitten toes. In this curious configuration of extremities and sibling grumbles, warmth was shared economically, if not comfortably. The average medieval peasant's nightwear, if such a thing could be so grandly labelled, consisted of the layers they'd worn during the day, plus perhaps an added layer of hay clinging rebelliously to their everyday garments. The linen chemises and tunics, you see, doubled as both day attire and nighttime apparel, saving the wearer from unnecessary wardrobe confusion at ungodly hours. Statistically, lice were the world's most efficient bedfellows back then, so our peasant friends weren't merely sharing their sheepskin blankets with family. They were housing a small but vehement community of critters. Let it not be said that medieval rustic culture lacked biodiversity. Beyond the bedroom, an area sometimes grandly referred to as the sleeping spot, the entire dwelling contributed its humble service to warmth preservation. Thatched roofs, reinforced with what enthusiasts might call roof patching, helped keep the cold out and batten the flames of their modest hearth fires. Chimneys, for the most part, hadn't quite made it to their architectural debut, so smoke would enigmatically linger around, adding both a lure and a slightly smoky flavor to the nightly stew. But perhaps most astonishingly, medieval nights weren't exclusively spent dreaming of warmer climates or perfecting the art of snore synchrony. Once settled, some peasants might pass time in the contemplative pursuit of looking at the stars through chinks in the walls. If there's one thing medieval peasantry can teach us, it's the art of turning a deficiency into stargazing opportunities. Just beneath the stars, a casual listen to the night soundtrack would reveal a pastoral symphony of mooing cows, clucking chickens, and occasionally an insistent goose partaking in what can only be described as avian karaoke. Yet, within the cottage walls, tales were spun and retold, a gathering over the imaginary glow of a hearth where laughter warmed hearts and story breathed life into weary bones. It may surprise some, or perhaps, given the hindsight wisdom, not at all, that these peasants, beneath a tapestry of blankets, connected to life's simpler joys. Banter about village mishaps or poetic musings on Lord Whomsoever's increasingly peculiar fashion choices slowly coalesced into the comforting rhythm of sleepy storytelling. And so, dear listeners, as tonight's tale reverently lulls you towards sleep, perhaps beneath your own contemporary layers of warmth, let us gently shift our gaze from embers that glow dimly in the heart of settlement fires to other midnight mysteries nestled within the world of medieval ingenuity. We find the night's whispers softly guiding us amidst the frosty embrace of a medieval winter, where every breath seems to carry with it a hint of icicles, dazzling beneath a canopy of stars. The peasant folk of yore found themselves engaged in a nightly duel, not just for warmth, but for survival itself. Considering you didn't have anything fancier than a wooden shack held together by sheer will and a prayer, mastering the art of warmth was, in medieval terms, an Olympic sport. Tonight, let us cozy up together and tumble into the peculiar ways these crafty common folks braved the elements. Enter the humble pile of straw, a symbol of hope and discomfort all rolled into one. It was more than just a bed. It was an exquisite, all-purpose solution to medieval life's many inconveniences. Need a mattress? Straw. Want some padding in your shoes? Straw. Got a drafty window? Stuff it with, yes, you've guessed it, straw. In fact, if one looked closely, they might even find straw lodged in notions of medieval philosophy, possibly present in their ponderings of, does one truly sleep between the earth and a bard's cry, or merely on a bed of straw? If chilly winds crept through cracks in the walls, as they almost certainly did, peasants wielded tapestries of the homemade variety, not the opulent, woven wonders of aristocrats, but repurposed rags merrily stitched together by agitated Aunt Beryl. These textile masterpieces, with patterns unworthy of deciphering, were pinned around beds like defensive battlements. Fortresses were forged not with bricks, but with a patchwork of wool and old linen. The clever old tapestries whispered tales of forgotten socks and knit-edged romance novels, all beneath the watchful silence of the night. Beneath the dirt-floored roofs, in this realm of gritty ingenuity, the villagers partook in a nightly tradition known majestically as group huddling. Whoever coined the phrase, strength in numbers, was likely nestled somewhere in the middle, enjoying the shared warmth without a care for peripheries. It was the medieval strategy of using communal company to tackle the collective chill. Their main criterion for group participation: get all cozy next to your neighbor. If you have reservations about their foot odor, it was best to leave them at the threshold of your huddle. To edge closer to sleep, they would often spin tales, medieval Netflix binges, if you will. Folk stories shared over the crackling wood fire, brimming with dragons that mysteriously borrowed their features from old Farmer John's cow, and knights whose gallant deeds seemed suspiciously borrowed from last week's barrel-making competition. These narratives held the temperature of dreams with laughter as potent as any well-constructed smoky hearth. Our resourceful ancestors developed a certain nocturnal bond, not just with their family, but occasionally even with livestock. Talk about counting sheep, but in medieval terms, that often meant living with them, side by side with your noisy neighbors, nature's very own heaters. Close quarters, humans and animals fostered a warmth that transcended the practical, an understanding embodied in those shared sleepy glances and the occasional inadvertent nibble of extremely endearing, albeit nibble-prone goats. Still, nights weren't solely about survival. Little flourishes of joy snuck into their chilly embrace. They had quaint, low-pressure social circuits that played out like eternally rolling credits, where moments lingered and curtains were drawn not just for privacy, but to keep the wind at bay. With eyes heavy-lidded and spirits lifted by simple comforts, they drifted further into slumber, wrapped in both familiarity and myriads of mismatched layers. As we tiptoe into the closing murmur of this chapter, Imagine those peasants tucked warmly into their straw beds, their heads filled with dreams of sunny days, as the winds howled like wolves outside. Tomorrow awaited with the same chilly bite. But for now, their dreams were warmer than the woolliest of suit cloaks. With a wispy sigh, we finally draw the curtains on the cozy chaos of this ancient nocturnal ritual. The night deepens, and a new tale gently beckons from the brink of awakeness, in the shadowy veil of a medieval night, where the moon shyly peeks through the cloak of winter clouds. We find ourselves wandering into the realm of the humble medieval peasant. Picture, if you will, a scene painted in muted tones of earthy browns and greys, occasionally brightened by the flicker of torchlight. As the chill of the evening settles in, it's easy to see why surviving the coldest nights turned peasants into masters of cozy ingenuity. Before the advent of central heating, the homes of these medieval dreamers had to face the formidable chill with only rudimentary resources. From thatched-roofed cottages, there's a gentle sound of crackling fires. Their hearths were not merely a place to roast their pies, but the heart of their warmth. An ancestor to our modern electric blanket, fueled not by watts, but by pure, rustic determination. Imagine the subtle humor in their nightly routines as the colder air swirled outside. Sheep, often more than just woolly jumpers to be sheared, occasionally joined the slumber party inside, living swaddles of warmth. Imagine watching grumpy sheep reshuffling, determined that no human foot should remain untrampled. These shared accommodations, domestic agreements between man and beast, were early rehearsals for the bizarre concept of tiny house cohabitation. The bed's comfort was a collective affair, devised like a game of medieval Tetris where everyone had a piece of the puzzle. Families huddled together, layered in cozy cloaks, unraveling knotted tales of Rumpelstiltskin-friendly proportions. The blankets of that era, often homemade from wool, competed in size with the short supply of space. Peasants wrapped themselves in these hefty layers like medieval burritos, serving not only tempting bedtime snacks for the imagination, but also delightful reminders of togetherness. As you drift closer, let's peer in on their evening entertainments. Storytelling was woven deeply into their evening rituals. Their narratives spun from both truth and the fantastically absurd. Did you hear about Tom, the ploughman, and his unbelievably large turnip? It once consumed half the village before revealing it was nothing more than an overzealous pig in vegetable disguise. Even the ceilings of these modest dwellings whispered tales of their own, layers of soot, patiently gathered by the lonely beams, accumulated over many seasons of story-laden nights. Occasionally, a mischievous breeze would send a flurry of this atmospheric dust across the room to settle on the unsuspecting slumberers below. To them, it was as if the fairies themselves joined their revelries, sprinkling sand before shepherding them to their dreams. And what of the nightcap? Not the woolen accessory, though undoubtedly keeping ears snug, but the vessel of liquid warmth. Ale, brewed with the expertise of the village's finest, emboldened with seasonal spices, was shared generously amongst the family's night watch. Far from your average pint, it carried the quiet bravery needed to embrace the frost with a smile, and some occasional light-headed banter about who indeed saw the ghost of Barnaby's cow wandering at midnight. Thus, snug in their beds, with the world encased in a shroud of icy silence, these peasants, their sheep, anvils of homemade blankets, the sweet lull of hearth crackle, and the laughter carried from the simplest of tales, surrendered to the night. They found laughter and light in times where frigid breath cast visible spectres into the air, and tiny moments sparkled like moonlit frost. As our minds float further into the embrace of this timeless winter night, the hearth dims its glow, and the tales of yore hum softly in the background, pulling us deeper towards another whimsy. Their stoic endurance and time-defying merriment transition us gently into the landscape of our dreams, preparing the way for the unexpected stories yet to unfold. May your own dreams find warmth in their ancient echoes. As the moon hung like a silver coin in the midnight sky over medieval Europe, the humble peasants, those stalwart souls of old times, were just beginning to stir within their humble abodes, preparing for another night fraught with icy challenges. Now, if you think you're cold when you forget to bring your scarf on a November evening, try surviving a medieval winter night where the heat of your household relied more on your livestock than any central heating. Remarkable, isn't it, how a moo or a baa could mean the difference between shivering and snug? Imagine, if you will, Otis the peasant, a man whose sense of humor was surpassed only by his ability to snore like a chorus of bagpipes. Every night, Otis would tuck himself snugly into his straw-stuffed mattress, luxurious beyond its time despite its prickly demeanor, draped in layers of woolen blankets, each seeming to weigh as much as a sleeping sheep. Not unlike a human sandwich, Otis's warmth strategy involved a collection of creatively redarned socks and a tunic that had seen so many winters it could practically count to 10 in frostbite. In the grand tradition of medieval craftsmanship, medieval fireplaces were marvels of rustic engineering that seemed less about heating the room and more about making peace with the chill. These open hearths provided a pleasant glow and inspired a nightly guessing game. Whether the room would become comfortably warm, or the humble flicker would vanish into the night like a ghost with a poor sense of direction. To combat winter's wrath, multi-generational households found their strength in numbers, proving once and for all that communal living was medieval Europe's answer to an electric blanket. This meant that evenings in the longhouse were often a blend of familial bonding and a robust game of who's hogging the blanket, a pastime that's been misnamed throughout the ages as well as across the genders. As humorously cozy as this sounds, the game of warmth involved several cunning strategies, akin to chess, but with more hay. Hay was diligently collected during warmer months, not only for feeding the animals, but for a purpose that was both crafty and, quite possibly, hilarious: to line the floors and walls of their abodes. This was insulation in its most rustic form, nature's very own fluffy, itchy miracle. So effective, one might say it could almost make you forget it was still technically just straw. Outside, animals were not exempt from this great battle against cold. An often overlooked fact about medieval farming is the symbiotic relationship between humans and livestock, particularly in winter. Farmers, ever the innovative engineers of medieval society, discovered that warmth might be obtained from another source, one that did not involve layering on more wool until one resembled a bipedal sheep. The barn, or byre as it was known to friend and foe, became a cozier alternative as animals like cows, providing a heaping supply of natural warmth, and let's face it, a dubious additional warmth courtesy of their digestive systems. Otis often found himself pulled into the lengthy conversations of Tobin, his family cow, whose contributions to their evening debates about local events were mooted but no less respected. As you drift ever closer to the sweet embrace of sleep, consider Otis's noble bovine companions, contentedly munching their hay and collectively dreaming of greener fields. As the night stretched on, Otis would occasionally ponder grand thoughts beneath his fraying blanket, contemplating the stars that twinkled through chinks in the thatch above. Did they too, in their celestial perches, endure endless winter plains? Perhaps. But for Otis, tucked in as snugly as any medieval farmer could wish, those distant fires winked down, offering their silent promise of another dawn to warm his weary limbs. And with that soothing thought, tucked under layers of history and hay, our sleep story begins to fade, as we float gently towards dreams of another medieval escapade. Amidst the soothing rustle of autumn leaves and the thousand twinkling eyes of stars, we find ourselves meandering through the shadowy corridors of the medieval night, seeking the age-old wisdom of how peasants braved the bone-chilling cold. Brave souls they were, those peasants, not just laborers of the land, but formidable masters of nighttime survival. While noble knights in their drafty castles wrapped themselves in ermine blankets, likely after a heroic day of jousting with dinner forks, the modest peasants wove their own tapestry of warmth and necessity. Winter nights were long and perilous, But peasant practicality held the key. Forget central heating. If you were expecting a medieval thermostat, you might still be living in the wrong century. Instead, the first line of defense was layers upon layers of woolen garments. Imagine, if you will, a line of stoutly layered straw villagers, resembling small, unseasoned bales, adorably knotted with belts. But alas, their fashion choices went further than the mere utility of countless wool coats. Those woolen wardrobes were hard-earned, often a testament to their spinning prowess during more balmy seasons. Imagine a land filled with sheep, ba-ing, ba lancing out the nippy night chorus of chirping crickets, each sheep responsible, of course, for a sound slumber for its well-knit owner. Beyond their ensembles, the bed itself was quite the innovation. Who needs a memory foam mattress when you've got a heap of straw sprinkled with sage? Now, don't imagine these straw beds as uncomfortable haystacks. They were more like rustic, nature-made mattresses with strategically arranged cottony layers of straw, reminiscent of a rustic countryside dreamscape. On particularly Arctic nights, when the wind howled so fiercely it seemed like an unseen, bearded minstrel serenading the moon, peasants had their secret weapon, the domestic animal. A cozy night with friendly creatures was the peasant equivalent of an all-inclusive buffet, complete with cuddles and the occasional warm milk beverage. Chickens, cows, and occasionally goats were invited to midnight parties, each performing their roles as living, breathing hot water bottles. Now, isn't that the original farm-to-bed comfort experience? If one found themselves in a unique predicament where neither layers of wool nor fuzzy livestock sufficed, the approach was to simply gather the whole peasant crew into the warmest part of the home, the hearth. Here, the family, often extended without discernment for personal space, would huddle together, cradling stories and secrets that crackled with the fire, turning every kitchen into a cozy tale factory. And not to be left out, let's speak for a moment of the humble DIY foot warmer, the potato. Now, this wasn't your ordinary potato, but the beloved, meticulously baked tater cradled affectionately at the foot of every medieval bed. Wrapped in cloth, it doubled as the family's hottest gadget and a snack, in case midnight cravings became too intense to ignore. Their tales of survival were not only ones of grit, but camaraderie, of finding warmth not just from the fire, but from the laughter, love, and unity that winter nights bundled together. They didn't just survive. Oh no, they thrived, connecting with each other and their world more deeply with every freezing breath. As the stars traced delicate patterns across a serene sky, casting silver streaks over the land, you can almost hear the echo of their resilience and humor, a bygone chorus of murmur and mirth, whispering secrets we might yet unlock. So with a gentle yawning stretch, let's nudge deeper into this velvety night. Something stirs in the distance, like a soft melody beginning to emerge from the silence. But for now, let the dreams drift on, just as the peasants settled into their softly rustling beds, preparing for what the new dawn would bring. Once upon a wintry night in medieval Europe, where the chill could sneak into your bones and set up a permanent residency, peasants faced what meteorologists today might charmingly refer to as below freezing and absolutely unforgiving. But fear not, dear listener, for these resourceful souls had more up their woolen sleeves than just frostbitten fingers. To paint the cozy yet slightly drafty scene, imagine a snug little cottage nestled in a village that's not significant enough to be found in most historical records. The thatched roof, resembling a slightly disheveled wig, bravely held back the snow, while the walls, made of whatever was handy, be it stone, mud, or that one particularly stubborn cow, stood defiantly against the icy wind. Inside, the heart of the home was the hearth. The fireplace did its best to double as a medieval HVAC system, though its efficiency could be compared to that of a very enthusiastic but underqualified intern. Gathered around, the family would stack wood or anything else that might catch fire in a pinch, creating a blaze just warm enough to remind them they still had fingers. which was all rather convenient for knitting more socks. Speaking of socks, footwear in this era was meant more to inspire than to insulate. Peasants fashioned their shoes from roughly tanned leather, which, when wet, could double as excellent foot spas, unintentional, yet oddly effective if you were into perpetually damp feet. But in the spirit of resilience, and possibly a little paternal pressure, peasant children learned to weave a healthy supply of woolen socks. Who needs central heating when you have socks so thick they could double as protective gear? When it was time to sleep, the family huddled together on a bed filled with straw and dreams, a technique not exclusively reserved for humans, as any cozy cow or curious goat might attest. Ever inventive, peasants relied upon their livestock not only for milk and cheese, but also for a little added warmth. As one might imagine, if you inadvertently rolled over onto a snoring sheep, there'd be almost instant companionship, a comforting method to keep warm. Their approach to evening wear was nothing short of artful layering. As the sun disappeared, peasants would slip into what today would be fashionably termed shabby chic. Layer upon layer of woolen wraps, cloaks, and tunics gave them the appearance of walking wardrobe exhibitions. Not to mention a delightful trance of muted colors that practically screamed, "I wasn't planning on going out anyway." If the cold was particularly ambitious, certain creative peasants might deploy the cunning hot rock in a sack technique. By nestling a heated stone into a cloth bag, they created a medieval version of a hot water. A bottle, one with a demeanor so reliable, you might just introduce it to your neighbors. Ah yes, have you met our newest family member? Their name is Igneous. The evening meal, possibly a hearty, well-intentioned stew, would simmer on the low embers, offering both sustenance and the occasional adventure in dental dexterity, depending on the toughness of the ingredients. As tales of the day's events bubbled thicker than the broth, the meal set the tone for sleepy contentment, peppered gently with laughter. In this humble yet hearty tapestry of warmth and wit, life carried on with stories spun between yawns deeper than any peasant's pockets. And so, as the moon cast its gentle glow over straw-filled roofs and firelit faces, they drifted into slumber, almost wistful, waiting for tales of the morrow, a narrative they hoped would begin with less ice and more sunshine. With the thought of the day you've now shared, let your eyes close gently, nestling into the tapestry of woven memories. Picture those chimneys puffing softly into the night while the soothing sounds of slumber envelop you, as they did the villagers long ago. As the village rests, so too might we anticipate the whispers of medieval mysteries to spill into the next chapter of our dreamy odyssey. In a time long before central heating and electric blankets, our medieval peasants devised a series of ingenious methods to stave off the biting chill of the coldest nights. Picture, if you will, a humble medieval village nestled beneath a star-strewn sky, where whispers of the moonlit breeze snake through the wooden beams of simple yet sturdy homes. Alas, even in this cozy tableau, winter's breath can find its way. One essential item in the medieval arsenal against cold was the trusty wool cloak. Imagine something akin to a modern snuggie, but infinitely more stylish, if one pairs it with an equally fashionable mud-stained tunic, of course. Wool, nature's very own defense mechanism, lent itself as a shield against the cold, much like a friendly sheep gone wearable. Fashionably draped across shoulders by day, these cloaks doubled as blankets by night, adding a literal layer of warmth to dreams. As the hearth sputters softly in the corner, casting flickers of light over the stone walls, families huddled close. The hearth, dear listeners, was more than a cooking spot. It was a medieval multi-tool of warmth and survival. The embers, glowing like tiny red eyes, did more than provide mere warmth and light. They were the medieval version of Netflix for hypnotizing family gatherings. Sleepovers were less of an optional activity for kids and more of a survival tactic for everyone. Bedtime was a communal affair, ensuring that body heat was distributed with the efficiency of a well-organized community group hug. Of course, with close proximity came the unspoken agreement to overlook each other's snoring, night farts, and an occasional elbow jab, a sort of medieval slumber. Warranty, if you will. Let's not forget the bed itself, or rather, the haystack loosely masquerading as a bed. Medieval peasants called upon straw and feather to serve as mattresses, while the family pig, considered an alternative heat source, sometimes shared the space. Now, before you scoff at the porcine sleeping arrangement, consider this. Pigs are known to be incredibly warm, and while some snuggled teddy bears, they snuggled teddy boars. The night would sound of the gentle crackle from the hearth, perhaps coupled with the distant howls of wind across the moor, and inside, the gentle rhythm of medieval lullabies. These tunes, charming in their simplicity, told whimsical tales of knights and dragons, enough to enchant dreamers, yet gentle enough to lull them into slumber. In essence, the medieval bard was the original bedtime podcaster. And oh, the pies of ingenuity did not end there. Remember that fences are not just for gardens. To keep out critters, yes, but also to keep in warmth. As the nights turned colder, tapestries would hang thickly from every conceivable wall. These were practical, yes, but also delightfully over-the-top displays of vibrant medieval artistry, adorned with stories and battles. Meticulously woven into the fabric, these tapestries offered insulation with a view, turning even the humblest home into a gallery of warmth. We cannot leave out the cunning contrivances they called nightcaps. Not just for Scrooge, these bedtime bonnets were the cherry atop the sundae of sartorial sleeping. This snug garment served not only to keep your head warm, but perhaps to muffle the more dissonant snores from the side of the bed where Uncle Ethelbert lay dreaming, or plotting his next misadventure. It was often hard to tell. As the night wore on and the cock's crow loomed closer, a final medieval curiosity appeared: the bedside bread. A battering ram for hunger and cold alike, this slice of stale delight was left to harden further by the bedside, requiring a hearty bite in the morning that would challenge even the sturdiest of medieval molars, much like eating a history lesson. So as the stars continued their slow waltz across the velvet sky, medieval peasants drifted into dreams, wrapped in layers of wool, soothed by crackling logs and piggy snores beneath a ceiling of stars or tapestries. The night, a friend, would carry soft hopes of morning warmth and perhaps a slice of bread that didn't need quite so much jaw strength. As we close this chapter on creative countermeasures against the cold, one can't help but wonder what other quaintly peculiar secrets our ancestors have up their sleeves. Perhaps we'll wander down the time-worn path leading to medieval days, or discover more nocturnal novelties to cradle our imaginations. But let's not rush. It's the delicate unraveling of history's mysteries that truly makes our dreams so warm. As the soft glow of candlelight flickered through the crevices of a medieval peasant's humble abode, young John the farmhand pondered the mysteries of surviving the coldest of nights. In a time long before heated blankets and the magic of turning a little dial on a wall, survival involved the ingenuity of resourcefulness and a healthy dose of medieval charm. Imagine, if you will, the finest technology of the age: a simple hearth. More than just a fireplace, this was the very heart of the home. Its fire might have been the medieval Netflix, endlessly fascinating and capable of mesmerizing tired eyes until sleep took over. The fire wasn't just there to roast turnips and toast shoulders. It was the ancient version of central heating, without the efficiency, temperature control, or any currently acceptable level of safety. At bedtime, hot stones might be carefully placed beneath bed sheets, turning the straw mattress into something resembling a mildly heated Stone Age waterbed, minus the water and hopefully the bedbugs. And then there was the most trusted, guardian of warmth, the family pig. Yes, the medieval bed was quite the social event, often hosting several members of the family, and perhaps a pig or two, under rough woolen blankets. Nothing said practical like the heat from a living radiator who occasionally squealed in agreement that winter was a tad cold and very overrated. Now, huddle close, because here's where it gets interesting. Dressing for bed meant maintaining layers of clothing rather than switching to a set of monogrammed pajamas or fluffy robes. The idea of changing clothes before sleep was, to use the medieval term, absurd. Why replace perfectly insulating garments when they were doing a fantastic job of maintaining personal warmth and a respectable collection of the day's scents? One might say, peasants were pioneers of the never-nude philosophy, not by choice, but by sheer necessity. Don't forget the medieval sleeping schedule, an affair as tantalizingly irregular as the wind patterns. The two-sleep system was a common approach. This meant drifting off for first sleep, waking for a likely candlelit moment of twilight musing, perhaps reciting prayers, contemplating life's mysteries, or simply puzzling over why one didn't yet live in a castle. Then, back to the warmth of second sleep, a reunion which was likely greeted with joy for its potential lack of frostbite encounters. As the village roosters prepped their vocal cords for the earliest renditions of the morning cacophony, John and his fellow villagers, despite the creaky bones and layers of wool, found a rhythm within the unpredictability of nature. Each dawn was greeted with a nippy cheek and stiff cape, knowing that the cycle of cold would repeat yet again. The clever peasant folk also had access to nature's tranquility-promoting elixirs, herbal teas. A mix of chamomile or valerian root was sometimes consumed to induce a fantastical medieval dreamland, where turnips tasted like cake and all emplacements were curiously warm. Bedtime may not have been accompanied by the gentle hum of an air purifier, but the soft sounds of a bustling village slowly drifting into silence beneath the stars provided its own lullaby. The night sky, unspoiled by city lights, served as a blanket of wonders, reminding all who dared to gaze upwards that even in the coldest nights, there was immense beauty to be pondered upon, a dreamy, celestial closing act. As we gently part the curtains on this chapter, allowing the medieval night to enfold us with its historical serenity, we set our thoughts adrift on wisps of quiet laughter and quaintness. Let us rest within these medieval mysteries, perhaps in anticipation of the whisperings of what other secrets and cozy tidbits await in the stories yet to unfold. As the soft whisper of the medieval night wrapped itself around the sleepy hamlet, let's drift into the snug world of those who are neither knights nor nobles, but peasants. Industrious folks whose survival was almost as much of a miracle as the unburnt toast that they commonly called breakfast. On a frosty evening, in a time long before thermal underwear or fleece-lined slippers graced the wardrobes of the weary medieval peasants, had to get creative to stave off the chill. Now, while these rustic souls might not have had modern technology to keep warm, they did possess an abundance of resourcefulness and an impressive number of drafty woolen layers. Imagine yourself in a quaint little thatched-roofed cottage, the walls coated in stories of whispered secrets and hard-earned sweat, while the wooden floor creaked underfoot like an ancient symphony of domestic unrest. In the center of this abode, a hearth flickered and crackled softly, its glow not just providing light, but the gentle warmth of survival. A fire kept burning was not merely a luxury, but a necessity, and thus the role of the ever-attentive family member who tended it throughout the night could only be described as the original, our night shift. The medieval bedtime routine was a delightful medley of pragmatic solutions and not-so-quiet family bonding, a stark contrast to today's bedtime plugging in of laptops and checking social media for the nth time. A particularly cozy, albeit pungent, method of warmth involved the entire household, chickens and family alike, huddling in for the night, sharing heat and perhaps questionable odors under crude but comforting woolen blankets and, sometimes beneath the heft of a straw mattress. Let's not forget the lively game of who can layers the most, where peasants would form an armor of woolen tunics, each with the texture approaching that of a particularly stubborn doormat. However, if you think that was as far as medieval innovation went, you might want to rethink your skepticism because some peasants took the concept of wearing warmth to a judicial extreme, packing their undulating layers like burritos of yore. Then there was the revered wassailing, a drinking tradition where cider was served so as to drink the tree and ensure good crops in the future, which handily kept the stomach warm and the spirit warmer, perhaps making the depths of winter just the tiniest bit more bearable, or at least more entertaining. But dear listener, the peasants' adaptability didn't end with just garments and drinks. Consider the wondrous invention of the heated stone foot warmer, a delightful little device where a rock, lovingly nestled into the fireside embers until toasty, would then be snuggled into the bed to offer the kind of warmth that brought dreams of sunlit meadows rather than the relentless cold of reality. Given the broad array of functions, this medieval-bound innovation might just as well have been the 14th century precursor to today's electric blankets, albeit with a slight risk of spontaneous ignition if handled irresponsibly. As you cozy up in bed, chuckle over the medieval tradition of keppe warm, which is simply lying in bed with loved ones for warmth, whispering stories of valor, might be true adventures, and tomorrow's hopes. The peasant life, for all its frosty challenges, was one where community endurance shone through the froth of frost on a breath. The nights faded into days, and winter eventually blossomed into spring, propelled on the backs of these quaint and resourceful struggles. But let us not pretend that the experience was always harsh or unenjoyable, for these snug gatherings and inventive solutions were filled with the charm of laughter, resilience, and a dash of medieval humor, scandalously not unlike the wit of a jesting minstrel. As this chapter of Warm Tales concludes, prepare yourself to float gently towards yet another slumbering tale from the annals of history, where new mysteries and murmurings await, to softly cradle your dreams as the fire of enthralling history glows just a bit longer on this winter's eve, nestled in the heart of a bustling medieval village, under a sky brushed with scattered stars like a monk's ink splatters on parchment. We find a man named Bert the Sensible. Bert, you see, had achieved quite the status among locals, not for his dashing looks or enviable wealth, but for his astute ability to survive the notorious bite of winter's chill with unparalleled panache. Now, friends, Bert wasn't about to let frosty nights get the best of him. He had no intention of resembling those unfortunate statues one might say hello to on their way to church, the ones frozen in eternal contemplation. Instead, Bert crafted his own winter wonderland of warmth through an intriguing blend of resourcefulness and just a hint of cunning. His first brilliant strategy: the medieval bed, a contraption worthy of applause. Bert's bed was no ordinary slab of straw and sadness. No. To endure the coldest of nights, Bert engineered a layered cocoon, piling hay upon hay until it rivaled the height of a manor house guardsman's plumed hat. Nestled at the peak, Bert made a nightly pilgrimage to the land of dreams, his toes toasty beneath a tapestry of well-worn old cloaks and perhaps a snuggled chicken or two, nature's own hot water bottles, complete with downy insulation and, let's be honest, occasional gentle clucking. But Bert's secret weapon didn't stop there. The man was a sartorial genius, skilled in the art of strategic layering long before Parisian fashionistas ever wove their first scarves. Each night, Bert donned layers of wool, linen, and even luxurious scraps of fur he managed to barter for at the annual fair. He sounded, albeit faintly, like a respectfully clothed potato sack as he shuffled around, but Bert wore this noise as his nightly symphony of warmth. It wasn't just personal coziness that occupied Bert's clever mind. No. His genius extended far beyond his own straw-quilted fortress. He understood the physiology of survival, knowing that a warm kitchen was the heart of any home. To that end, he'd coax the thriving embers in the hearth to dance and glow deep into the night. Shadows of bygone bannermen ducked receding corners, and as the firelight flickered, the cool night surrendered, inch by cozy inch. Occasionally, one of Bert's famed gatherings would occur, a medieval version of a slumber party, where stories were spun and ailments miraculously cured with a quiet plop of a jug of mead. Guests would huddle together, belly laughs resonating, each chuckle another log on the proverbial fire. The gathered warmth of shared stories and spirits would linger, quieting the icy grip outside like nothing else. Ah, the role of neighbors cannot be overstated. In the spirit of communal cheer, Bert and his fellow villagers often engaged in what we shall call the Great Quilt Exchange. Ever the diplomat, Bert would trade favored possessions, let's not linger on what those might be, for an extra quilt or sheepskin from more fortunate neighbors. A cycle of warmth passed from hand to hand, making its own quiet revolution in the village halls. And perhaps the secret ingredient in Bert's arsenal of warmth-lending luxuries was a silent pact with his feline liege, Sir Percelot. Each night, with the precision of an abbess ringing the vespers bell, Sir Percelot found his perch atop Bert's layers, like a grand admiral surveying the soft sea of hay below. Together, the duo inspired a chill-thwarting symphony of purrs, warming not just Bert's body, but his soul. As the night deepened, Bert would drift off, adrenaline-pushed blood finally deciding to bask calmly in shared warmth and contentment. How marvelously, dear listener, Bert the Sensible applied practical wisdom to deftly outsmart the coldest nights with nothing more than a bed of hay and sweet, feline companionship. Perhaps, as you settle into your own cocoon tonight, layered or not, you'll take a leaf from Bert's book. The gentle sizzle of fading embers seems to whisper lullabies as another cold wind dances over the rooftops. It's a perfect segue into what's next, a dive into the heart of village festivities that cuddled against the backdrop of wintry nights with all the effervescence of spiced cider and cheerful songs. As the sun sleepily tucked itself beneath the horizon, leaving the medieval realm to bask in twilight's gentle embrace, the peasants of yore found themselves entering the nightly battle against the cold. However, medieval life was not just a bitter tale of discomfort, but rather a saga enamored with ingenious solutions and moments of unintentional hilarity. Imagine, if you will, a rustic peasant from the quaint village of Tiddlemere. His name was Bertram, and he had aspirations as lofty as his hay-stuffed mattress, oddly unyielding, yet sufficient for dreams of great rambles about turning wheat into gold. As the cold wind serenaded his thatched roof, Bertram conjured his first line of defense: layering. Cloaks, tunics, and old blankets were wrapped around him like a human croissant. Each layer added not only warmth, but a sense of cumbersome dignity, offering the impression that he was mummifying in reverse. But let us not underestimate Bertram's dedication to bedtime warmth. His cozy cocoon would have been incomplete without the fireplace, a timeless ally against winter's icy breath. With nary a flick of an electric switch, a merry blaze was born each night using skills passed down like treasured gossip. Bertram's hearth would soon glow, its flames doing a hypnotic jig on the stone walls. It's amusing to think how villagers attributed mysterious personalities to their hearth fires, much like how one might mistake their cat for a cryptic philosopher. Whilst fire crackled merrily, livestock played an unexpected role in these chilly nighttime escapades. For medieval peasants like Bertram, sheep weren't just providers of wool, but also unofficial bedfellows in the grand quest against shivering. The term three-dog night predated by a few centuries into a two-sheep night, involving a couple of loyal sheep huddling in for added warmth. They'd curl up at the foot of the bed like slightly bewildered hot water bottles, albeit ones prone to baaing. Amidst these goings-on, let us not forget the meandering presence of parish monks. Armed with more than just ecclesiastical wisdom, they occasionally provided herbal concoctions said to soothe both mind and temperature sensitivity. Take, for example, a tea brewed from valerian root or the humble chamomile, nature's gentle nod to a medieval lullaby. We're unsure if the calming effects made it from cask to cup intact, or transformed into lively debate topics on how many archangels could fit on a needle, but monks assuredly tried. The medieval peasant's slumber was also serenaded by music, Not from Spotify playlists, but perhaps a lute, plucked gently in the corner like a nostalgic muse. It suggests an evocative scene, Bertram drifting into dreams under the twinkling stars, seen only through the occasional hole in the roof, accompanied by a distant string melody reminiscent of troubadours who might come knocking for hearthside stories and meals. Yet, let's not forget a critical component. Nightly storytelling played an essential role in steering the mind away from cold extremities. Families gathered close under the dull glow of an oil lamp, sharing tales of legendary knights and cunning foxes outsmarting bumbling farmers. The power of imagination served as a mental duvet, enveloping listeners in warmth and creativity. If medieval doping tests existed, Bertram's family might have tested positive for exceeding their limits on imagination. So as you ponder the world of Bertram and his medieval peers, wrapped snugly, warmed by wool and fire, serenaded by stringed whimsy and gentle narratives, remember that adapting to winter's chill involved more than brooding stoicism. It was a whimsical dance of ritual and resourcefulness, bound by humor and the simplicity of human relationships. And as night seamlessly transitions into a new chapter, the fables of survival unfold, revealing further tales of how resilience and imagination partnered to create cozy ends to chilly days. As the sun reluctantly set over the vibrant tapestry of medieval life, the humble peasant was faced with a predicament as old as time itself, surviving the bitter cold of a medieval night without turning into a less exciting version of a human popsicle. It was a challenge that required not only resilience, but a certain degree of ingenuity. And so, they adopted tactics that might, on first glance, seem a bit absurd, yet were brilliantly effective, and occasionally amusing. Consider, for instance, the art of communal sleeping. In an era where the concept of personal space was as mythical as dragons, it was perfectly normal for an entire family, livestock included, to pile onto a single straw mattress, as if performing an elaborate medieval magic trick. Surely the closeness did wonders for family bonding, though perhaps less so for personal hygiene, and the shared body heat was a cozy, albeit sometimes pungent, deterrent to the chilling winds. One might say the real miracle was that they managed to get any sleep at all, amidst, simultaneously, snoring humans and occasionally baying sheep. For those struck by wanderlust across the icy fields, or who temporarily lost their spots on the family bed, there was always the rustic invention of the stone bed warmer. Unlike today's electric options, this wasn't something you could easily plug in. To warm your toes, you'd simply pop a hefty stone onto the fire until it absorbed enough heat to vaguely resemble a tiny sun. Once at an optimal temperature, which was anything between toasty and an absolute scorcher, the stone was strategically placed under the straw mattress. Nothing screams medieval hazard like the possibility of incinerating one's bedding, but sacrifices must be made in the name of a snug night's sleep. When the nights turned especially frigid, peasants reveled in a unique custom known only as wear all the clothes you own, all at once, forever. Layers included woolen tunics, breechcloths, and even cloaks when things got extra dicey. This strategy provided both warmth and the sartorial look of a potato sack with delusions of grandeur, but fashion is a minor concern when one's immediate future involves potential frostbite. The hearth, often the most popular inhabitant of the medieval home, served not just to warm, but to cajole warmth into lethargic bones and tender toes. Through the fine art of strategically sitting close enough to the fire without singeing one's eyebrows, peasants found a balance that suited both their body temperature and their final wish to keep what limited eyebrows they possessed. Sometimes the fire was even used as a social gathering zone where storytelling was plentiful. Tales laden with humor and exaggerated, heroics reminiscent of a very, very low-budget Netflix special. However, those tending more to forward-thinking innovation than fireside tales had other interesting notions. Amongst them was the windproof wall design, a marvel to rival any lavish medieval architecture. This involved strategically placing fabrics over windows and gaps with the precision of an artist, not so much to herald an era of heat conservation, but more to brave the winter winds with the tiniest breath of warmth preserved. In the private world where the temperature often mimicked an icebox, drink was another trick up the medieval sleeve. Mulled ale, rich and spicy, or its less prestigious cousin, warm water with some mysterious herb that purportedly cured both the plague and the sniffles, became the medieval luxury from which the heart and body were supposedly warmed. While we might not consider this a full Michelin star experience nowadays, at the time it was their own version of a hot cocoa. Nightcap. As you close your eyes, perhaps envision the starlit tranquility overhead, wrapping each rustic homestead with its twinkling, frosty cloak. Allow yourself to be lulled into restfulness, perhaps by the vibrant hum of stories shared by those simple folk huddled around fires, their laughter slipping out into the crisp air and rising with the faintest wisp of smoke. For now, you are wrapped snugly in your own cozy retreat, the chill kept valiantly at bay by those same whimsical and wise methods that sustained generations through their medieval winters. Awaiting in the folds of sleep, just beyond the horizon of consciousness, lie yet more tales to inspire a gentle, bonding warmth, reminding us that there's always some magic in our past worth dreaming about. In the depths of a medieval winter, when the days were short and the nights stretched on with a seemingly endless chill, peasants developed a natural, albeit unintended mastery of the art of surviving the cold. Imagine, if you will, the rustic ambience of a 12th century peasant's hut. The common abode was less a luxurious manor and more a humble mixture of mud and straw, designed to keep the drafts at bay and give pests a prime backstage view of peasant life. The centerpiece of warmth and familial coziness was the hearth, a fireplace so rudimentary it could have doubled as a prototype for minimalist art. The hearth was where the magic happened. It was here that families gathered, not just to keep warm, but to bask in the unmatched glory of stewing mystery meat. Let us face it, back in those days, Wednesdays were often stew days, just like Thursdays and Fridays. The hearth was also something of a multitasking miracle, where not only did food simmer, but so too might a pair of slightly crispy, oft damp undergarments find themselves toasting gently beside a pot of bubbling whatever you had on hand. It took a certain finesse to balance everything just right, ensuring one's leggings were warmed, but not ignited. We can all be thankful that this was well before the advent of polyester. But when the night descended and the stars painted the sky, the hearth, though noble, could not warm every corner of the peasant abode. Enter the human radiator, otherwise known as the family goat. While today we may snuggle up to a Labrador or burrow into a fleece blanket, medieval peasants had the bleating pleasure of cuddling with farm animals. A goat or sheep could provide just the right amount of warmth. Think of them as the electric blankets of yore, albeit ones with an occasional need for kibble. Then there were the beds themselves. Oh, what delightful constructions they were. Before the days of memory foam and Egyptian cotton sheets, one took repose upon a robust trundle brimming with straw. There's something almost poetic about the thought of straw poking through the woolen blankets. Perhaps the medieval equivalent of sleeping on a beach towel that never quite lies flat. Yet, peasant beds came with their own charm, an assortment of fleas and other tiny companions who seemed perpetually enthusiastic to turn the night into a scratch party. Consider it medieval spa treatment, complete with free dermabrasion. As the chill air snaked its way through the crude walls, peasants deployed their final cold weather survival tactic, the humble art of layering. While we modern folks might liken this to loading up on sweaters until mobility is questionable, medieval layering had a certain dignified grace. Cloaks over tunics, tunics over shifts, only interrupted by the occasional loincloth. Every layer told a story, ideally one that distracted from the sub-zero temperatures. Despite their full-body cocooning, one essential knack the peasants wielded with care was the strategic withdrawal of cold extremities toward their core. An arm outstretched to stoke the fire might be hastily retreated, as though undergoing a medieval game of the floor is lava, with only the game, peace being one's life-maintaining digits. And so, beneath the heavy weight of homespun blankets, amid a symphony of snoring and occasional baaing, they would drift into a slumber, dreaming, perhaps, of summer fields, of village gatherings where stone soup was doled out liberally, of chickens that never roosted above the family bed. As you settle softly into your own nest of pillows and warmth, let your mind drift further with the ease of a boat adrift on a calm sea. Soon we'll navigate away from the frosty threads of medieval winter and into the colourful tapestry of their less frigid shenanigans. Nestled beneath the thickened cloaks of a starlit sky, medieval peasant life thrived in a rhythm of nature's whispers and woolen wisdom. As snowflakes flutter like tiny, celestial ballerinas, we venture into the heart of a wintry eve, where survival amidst the biting cold was both a cunning art and a comedic ballet. Picture yourself in a humble wattle and daub hut, its mud walls, snugly embracing a family, a menagerie of dreams, and a few spirited chickens who clearly have no concept of personal space. The drafty confines are alive with the symphony of crackling fires and harmonizing snores, a quaint lullaby of the Middle Ages. In these delightful abodes, people practiced a peculiar amiability towards warmth and each other. It was quite the balancing act, steeped in both pragmatism and charm. To fend off the icy embrace of winter night, peasants swathed themselves in an array of textile innovations. Layers upon layers of woolen garments were piled on, making sure they had the fashionable look of a medieval onion. The trick was never to remove all layers simultaneously, unless, of course, you wanted an impromptu ice skating session on your own floor. While the concept of a bedtime onesie hadn't exactly caught on yet, a cunning creation known as the bedgown graced the scene. This versatile garment allowed for a seamless transition from functional, daywear, to nocturnal cocooning. Now, medieval peasants had mastered the art of heat distribution with a flair that would impress even modern thermal engineers. Heated stones, cleverly dubbed bed warmers, served as makeshift sun substitutes, capturing the day's scant warmth to release it gently under homespun covers. These trusty stones were the unsung heroes of night, alongside the strategically placed livestock, whose body heat contributed to both coziness and a uniquely pungent ambience. Unlike their urban counterparts, who might huddle close to the nearest pub, rural dwellers embraced a communal philosophy. Entire families, children, parents, and let's not forget the rather charming aroma of the family goat, slept together in close quarters. This camaraderie not only fortified familial bonds, but also guaranteed that no one woke up with frostbitten extremities. It was a time when sharing a bed with your siblings made you both safer and more tolerant of snoring theatrics. Of course, laughter was the unheralded cornerstone of warmth. A well-timed joke could melt the frost in ways that even the heartiest broth couldn't achieve. Storytelling by the fire became both an entertainment and a survival strategy, spinning tales that danced like flames to keep spirits high and minds away from the gnawing chill. These narratives wove humor and history in equal measure, a blend that underscored the profound resilience of those who lived by the rhythm of the seasons. The agrarian calendar, far from delivering just drudgery, offered its own entertainment calendar. Festive winter gatherings, known as peasants' balls, were filled with music, dancing, and a little extra mead for liquid courage. The sight of villagers jubilantly dancing in layers of woolen fashion was proof that even in times of little luxury, joy could be found in the smallest of revelries, or in the largest of bonfires that followed. As we let this vignette of medieval warmth settle, the wonders of communal ingenuity shine through. These tales drift through the night air, much like the smoky tendrils rising from an ancient hearth. A mellow reminder that the essence of survival, much like a good bedtime story, lies in the joy of a shared human experience. As the fire dims to a gentle glowing ember, whispering promises of stories yet untold, we find ourselves irresistibly drawn further, through secrets and serenades, into the velvety embrace of night's deeper mysteries. And in that soft transition, we edge closer to another world of tales, slipping seamlessly into the dreams on the horizon, where history is a dance and laughter, a lullaby. As our dreamlike journey through the whimsies of medieval survival drifts onwards, let us now amble quietly through the frosted cobblestone paths of a medieval village, where the soft glow of candlelit windows and tendrils of chimney smoke signal evenings well spent in cozy, if slightly smoky, domiciles. The medieval peasant, often portrayed as an eternal participant in what some might describe as history's longest endurance challenge, had surprisingly inventive ways of maintaining the fine art of warmth amidst the clutches of winter's icy fingers. Picture this: a brisk winter evening in the late 1300s. The sun has graciously dimmed its incandescent watch over the land, leaving behind a silvery tapestry of moonlit snow. A little stone cottage stands resolutely against the chill in its thatched hat, its walls nearly groaning with the weight of tales untold. Inside, you would encounter the simple yet surprisingly effective methods these peasants employed to stave off the cold. Methods as quaint as a basketful of kittens in woolen bonnets. First, we must acknowledge the hero of any medieval household: the hearth. This fiery heart of the home was kept alive with a constant supply of firewood, often gathered by the bucketful, and sometimes with the day-long labor intensity one might associate with catching a particularly elusive butterfly. The fire was not merely a source of warmth, but a beloved member of the family, one that did not require sustenance beyond dry logs and the occasional sigh of resignation when the wind found its way down the chimney. Next to this blazing compatriot, one might find a curious assortment of critter companions, from goats with winning personalities to chickens enumerating grain like tiny accountants. No part of the house would be wasted. The animals often shared their living quarters, both for warmth and for the unmistakable charm of waking to the soft rustle of a chicken dreaming of cornmeal. While some might joke that this arrangement provided one of the earliest motivations for inventing potpourri, the companionship of warm bodies was a comfort second only to the hearth. Then there is the delightfully practical troubadour of the medieval night, the humble bed. Peasants were resourceful, and their beds were marvels of multi-purpose utility. A bed was not merely a place for rest, but a repository for every warm thing within arm's reach. Layers of scratchy wool blankets, lovingly mended quilted covers, and meticulously stacked feathers to fluff the pillows. An intricate cultivation of comfort 400 years before duvet covers became a thing. And therein lay the delightful secret weapon, straw. Though it may not have been the stuff of aristocratic slumber, it was an insulator supreme, each stalk a champion of anti-chill. Even our medieval compatriot's attire was decidedly snug, although sometimes itchy enough to dance a jig in. Sitting close by the hearth, peasants layered themselves in garments crafted of wool, the prickly bane of all those who preferred a gentle snuggle. And thus began the nightly ritual. A vigil, a watch against the cold, swaddled in a cocoon of wool that invited the deepest of slumbers, dreams spun amidst its fibrous embrace. And so they lay, tucked in, hearts ablaze, recounting stories by firelight. Tales of yesteryears weaved through whispers of the wind against the eaves, dreams riding the currents of the mind like sea shanties borne aloft by sleep. It was this communal bond, this shared warmth, perhaps even more enduring than any roaring fire, that held winter's advances at bay. As the embers dim their lustrous glow, and the sounds of the village gently succumb to the silence that invites contemplation, we find ourselves nearing a new chapter. One might almost hear the soft rustle of history as it folds over into the next page, a bridge over which we shall traverse, come what may. With the wisdom of the past as our guide, we prepare for the next revelations, wrapped snugly in the gentle cloak of night. As the medieval moonlight softly poured over the frosted meadows, our weary peasants dusted the snowflakes from their woolen caps with a resigned sigh. You see, dear listener, myth has long spun a yarn that these brave souls merely hugged their sheep and counted medieval lullabies, until the night turned warm again. However, we assure you, medieval life was far more creative than that. When faced with those relentless winter nights, the village had a secret weapon, sort of like seasonal insurance against the icy grip of frost. Introducing the medieval bedmate. Now, this was not just an actual person, although sharing a bed with your entire family, and perhaps a neighbor or two, was definitely a warming strategy that had its charms. No, the clever countryman also relied heavily on something known as the warming pan. These pans, filled with coals, were expertly swirled between the sheets, doing more of a don't touch the bed dance around the lies of what made sheets scorching. And if you squint closely, they might have been the forebearers of what we modern folks endearingly call heated blankets. Of course, this invention wasn't without its flaws, given that medieval fire safety training had not yet become a Saturday morning cartoon. And when warmth came in a tin platter with dancing embers, one had to tread the narrow line between snug and singed. In many of these quaint medieval homes, the hearth was more than just a place to roast a turnip or toast a loaf of coarse bread. It was the nucleus of the house, a glowing sun in the microcosm of hay, wood beams, and perhaps a sleeping chicken or three. Families gathered round its warmth, their silhouettes flickering against the wattle and daub walls, marveling at the crackle of sap as if it were their very own medieval Netflix. This fondness for the fireside brought about the enlivening ritual of tale-telling, an auditory tapestry of folklore rich with heroic exaggeration, a smidge of local gossip, and just a hint of cautionary wisdom about ogres that possibly live down the way. By dimming the chill of reality with tales woven of yore, the villagers found warmth not just in the crackling flames, but in the soft glow of imagination. Of course, no cozy village night would be all quite complete without our stalwart peasants paying homage to their putative diurnal duty of this era. Yes, it was time for something akin to a medieval spa day, albeit with less lavender and more leather. Wrapped in furs and clinging to whatever heat the day had granted them, there was the joyous infusion of dollar store wine into the mix. This celebrated blend of vinegar and stubborn grapes was a formidable secret weapon, rolling warmth through the villagers' veins faster than a trebuchet, dispatching its payload. Add to this nightly symphony the gentle clucking of hens settling in, the soft bars of sheep composing their woolen lullabies, and the low, resonant snores of those exhausted from both toil and tipple. And what you have is not just the sound of a medieval village surviving a cold night, but thriving in its own modest right, content to tuck themselves in against the frosty whispers of winter. As we leave our medieval compatriots to their dreams beneath their thatched skies, bundling away thoughts of tomorrow's chores and adventures, let us gently close the book on their story. Tonight, much like every other, the past whispers through the wind, sharing secrets of how warmth was found in laughter, innovation, and most assuredly, each other. And though our journey through the frosted timeline draws to a quiet close, your own dreams await just over the horizon. Rest, knowing history will always be your storytelling friend, bidding you soft dreams and an even softer pillow to lay upon.